All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday evening service. And hope you've had a good week so far as we are still hopefully refreshed from Sunday. Would you please stand as we look to sing and worship the Lord this night? Hymn number 269, How Great Our Joy. While by the sheep we watched at night, glad tidings brought an angel bright. How great our joy, great our joy, 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 joy. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. There shall be born, so he did say, in Bethlehem a child today. How great our joy, great our joy, 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 joy. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. There shall the child lie in a stall, this child who shall redeem us all. How great our joy, great our joy, 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 joy. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. This gift of God will cherish well, that ever joy our hearts shall fill. How great our joy, great our joy, 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 joy. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. Praise we the Lord in heaven on high. Thank you. You may be seated. As you can tell, we're starting to sing Christmas hymns, because Christmas is coming soon, right? It's be here before we know it. We want to go over the announcements tonight with you, and our first announcement is that, yes, tonight we have restarted Awanas. So we're back in session, and we want to encourage you to bring your children ages 3 to 6th grade to Awanas. My kids tonight were telling me the verses that they memorized, and it's just a joy and a blessing to hear that. It's something that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. So we encourage you to be part of that. And also, for the older kids, grades 7th through 12th, we have our youth group. And we have just started it up again this past couple months, and I know there'll be a blessing to them. Also, this Friday, we have not only youth group on Wednesdays, but on Fridays, we have our youth group Christmas kickoff. That will be on December 3rd, this Friday, from 7 to 9 p.m., and they're going to be having a youth Christmas party, so we would invite you to come out to that. And then December 5th, on Sunday, we have our missionary to the Philippines that we've been supporting for a couple decades now, and that's Courtney Godsoe. Then on Sunday, December 12th, we have our Concord Christian Academy Choir. We'll be doing handbell and choir selections as we look forward to that. And then on the 19th of December, we have our church choir that we bring forth the cantata, The Light of Bethlehem. And then that evening, Sunday night, December 19th, we have a candlelight dinner, so we want to welcome you to come out to that. And I'm sure it'll be a nice spread for everyone to eat. And then December 24th, we have our Christmas Eve service. Always a blessing to talk about how the Lord has brought us through this year and as we remember Christ's birth. So those are announcements, and we ask you to be part of those things coming up, exciting things that we have going on.
All right, how's everybody tonight? All right? Not too many out here in the auditorium. Hopefully we got more watching online. Hey, don't forsake us on Wednesday night. I know it's more convenient sometimes to stay home and just tune us in, but it's a blessing to come out in person, to be with God's people, to pray together, to fellowship together. So we want to encourage you that, sometimes find the convenient way, but we want to encourage you to come on out and join us. And it's not an encouragement to each and every one here, but it's an encouragement to me likewise. All right, we're going to look at 2 Samuel chapter number 19 tonight. Brother John has done the last 3 Wednesdays. I appreciate that. I've been out of commission, was able to preach Sunday, and that was a blessing, but had missed three Wednesday nights. So I kind of forget even what's going on with David anymore. But I have watched John's lessons, so that's good. Alrighty, let's pray first, and we'll get right into the Bible lesson. Father, bless our time together. Help us now to see the life of David and to see his victories, his defeats, wise decisions, poor decisions. And as his story unfolds, show us, Lord, lessons that will help us in our day-to-day walk with you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty, tonight we're going to look at the subject, how that David is going to return as the king. David returns as the king. Bringing back the king. Well, why is he returning as king? What had happened to David? He lost his kingdom. For just a short amount of time, who did he lose it to? His son Absalom. So let's review just a minute. This is what John talked about 2 weeks ago. Last week we had a little Thanksgiving psalm. But 2 weeks ago, let's just kind of review a few things that happened. Absalom, the son of David, decides that he's going to steal the kingdom away from his dad. He, through his personality and talking to people at the gate and encouraging people to follow him, eventually wins the hearts of many of the people in Israel. And so they now follow Absalom, and he's going to now revolt against his dad. I can't imagine, a son revolting against his dad to the point where he would have killed him if he had an opportunity to do that. It shows you how evil and wicked Absalom was. And so Absalom, of course, he had a history with his dad, David. Remember, Absalom had killed his brother Amnon. Amnon had violated Absalom's sister, and it was Tamar. So there was a bad blood there with Absalom. He finally revolts against his dad, and he has a majority of people that are going to follow him. So David leaves his house, his possessions. He's weeping, he's crying, he's barefooted. I can imagine how distraught he was as he was, having to leave his palace. His 10 concubines were violated openly and publicly, and he's now on the run. Well, Absalom appears to be able to take over the role as king of Israel. And everybody is kind of behind Absalom, and hey, let's follow Absalom. David's past history, and now God has given us a new king, and so he had quite a following. Well, then there was David, though he still had the hand of God upon him, and as John brought out the last few weeks about this, the battle between Absalom and David. David, had some mighty soldiers, and he had a good-sized army. He divided up into 3 different sections, and Absalom took some bad advice. And John talked all about that, and one of his advisors, Ahithophel, he didn't receive his counsel. He went on and committed suicide. But anyhow, as the battle goes, David said, "Don't harm my son. Don't touch my son. Capture him, bring him back, but don't kill my son." Even though he was a rebel and wanted to kill David, he didn't want his son to be killed, just like he didn't want Saul to be killed when Saul was after him. So eventually, David's men are better warriors. They defeat the armies of Absalom. 20,000 people are killed. 20,000 people killed over this civil war is what it was. And If you remember how the story ends, Absalom's hair gets caught up in a bough of branches, and he's hanging there. And Joab, the general, had no business in killing Absalom, but yet he shot 3 darts at him, and then 10 men went over there and slaughtered Absalom, and now he's dead. They bring back the message to David, and the message, there were 2 messengers came. The second messenger came, and he said, in essence, your son is dead. Your son is dead. David goes into great weeping and mourning, and in chapter 18, verse 33, he says, "O my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son." We continue the story now in chapter 19. And it was told, verse number 1, 2 Samuel chapter 19, verse 1, it was told Joab, "Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom." Now, who was responsible for the death of Absalom? Joab. But Joab goes to David now. He sees David is mourning and weeping. And, Joab was he was a cutthroat guy. I mean, he was a mean guy. He killed people. He killed Abner, who was, Saul's general. I mean, you couldn't trust Joab. He was just, he was just a hardened warrior. Now, he was loyal to David, but he didn't always obey what David wanted him to do. And David told him, "Don't touch my son." But he kills him anyhow. So now he is weeping, and Joab doesn't like the fact that the king is weeping. Why are you weeping? This is your enemy. We killed him. We got rid of your son. He's nothing but a rebel. And so therefore, as he is weeping, he calls him out over that. Verse number 4, he says, and the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." So he's continually weeping and crying and calling out, in great remorse. And the people hear this. And so they thought it was a great victory, and now David is upset. And verse number 5, and Joab came unto the house of the king and said, "Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life and the lives of thy sons and thy daughters and the lives of thy wives and the wives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemy and hatest thy friends." Well, this is a pretty stinging accusation. He said, in essence, you love your enemy and you hate your friends. You love the guy that wanted to kill you, Absalom, and now you hate us for defending you. And so in essence, he said, you're going to lose the people. The people, are not going to want to follow you if you are going to keep weeping and wailing over your lost son. And you need to be thankful, in essence, that he's dead. So David hears this. He composes himself. He rose up. He knew what he had to do now. And he's going to now, has one thing to do. He's got to take back the kingdom. He's got to go back, because he lost the kingdom. They had already pronounced Absalom as the king. Now, there is no king of Israel. So David has to go back and proclaim that he's going to be the king. So let's look at some points tonight. Our first point is going to be the return of the king. The return of the king. Under that, let's look at a recognition of David. A recognition of David. Let's look at verse 9 and 10. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "The king saved us out of the land of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled out of the land for Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why speak ye not a word bringing the king back?" The people start feeling bad. David was our king, and he was a good king. He protected us against the Philistines. He brought peace to our land. He defeated, our enemies, and we turned on him. So you can see now the people have regret. Why did we do this? Why did we follow Absalom? We should have been loyal to David. And as they are now in this spirit of remorse, they have a decision to make. Should we bring David back? He was already anointed as king, but previously, and then we anointed his son, and what should we do? So the people were in strife. They're arguing, what direction do we need to go now? So let's look at the second thing under this. David gives a request by David. So David's going to speak up. And notice what he says in verse 11. And King David sent to Zadok and to Abiathar, the priest. These are the two priests that helped him. Speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, Why are ye the last to bring the king back to this house? Sing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house. You are my brethren, you are my bones and my flesh. Wherefore then are you the last to bring back the king? So what tribe does he address? Judah. Why does he address Judah? Because David was from Judah. So he goes back, if you remember, David, the first 7.5 years of his being a king, he was only king over Judah. And then the next 33.5 years, or 33 years, whatever, he became king over all of Israel. So he goes back to his tribe and he says, why haven't you called me back? Why am I not back being the king again? So he's gone to his brethren. And so therefore, he's going to do something that is a little bit odd. And in verse number 13, notice what he does. It says, And say ye to Amasa, Art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. Now, who is Amasa? Amasa was a traitor to David. Amasa had jumped ship, and when Absalom revolted against his dad, Amasa was his general. Now understand this. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense maybe to you either. Think about this. So you have the guy that supported your son who wanted to get rid of you, and all of a sudden you say, you're going to be my general. You're going to replace Joab. Notice what it says here. It says, if thou wilt not be captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. Amasa was from Judah, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. But he was a traitor. He went and backed up his enemy. What was David thinking? Why did David replace Joab? Didn't Joab defend David? Wasn't he loyal to David? But what did Joab do that he should not have done? He killed his son. So he held that against Joab. You didn't obey me. You're responsible for my son. I'm replacing you. In essence, he fires him as his general. But he takes the general from his enemy to replace him. Maybe he's trying to, bring together both sides, the people that were followers of Absalom. Maybe he's showing, hey, I'm going to compromise. I'm going to use the guy that, was on your side. He's going to be now my general. We're not sure what David was thinking. To me, it didn't sound like a good plan. But that's what he does. And so verse 14, he bowed then the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man, so that they sent his word unto the king. Return thou and all thy servants. So the people agreed, yes, we will agree to have David come back. So he's going to come back to Judah. Well, does that mean he's going to be king over all of Israel? Well, that's his goal. But right now, the only tribe that accepted David back was Judah. And so now he's on the other side of the Jordan River, which would be modern day the country of Jordan. So he's on the other side of the Jordan River. That was, that's where he had been located. So now he has to cross the Jordan River to come back and go to Jerusalem. And so let's look at verse 15. So the king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go to meet the king, to conduct the king over Jordan. So let's get the picture. So here's the Jordan River. Can you see the Jordan River? By the way, if you want to get a picture of the Jordan River, you know where you should go? Go down to the Brandywine Creek. Have you ever been down to the Brandywine Creek? If you see the width of the Brandywine Creek, that's about the width of the Jordan River. Now, it may have been wider back in the day. I remember the first time I went to Israel, I'm like, that's the mighty Jordan River? That's it? This big Sea of Galilee, it's not that big, it's a lake. Everything in the Bible seems a lot bigger than what it really is. Anyhow, so here's a picture. So here's the Jordan River. Here's Israel on this side. Here's Jordan on this side. And it depends how you're looking. If you're looking at this way, he's going to travel from east to west. And Gilgal is the city right over the other side of the Jordan River. So all of Judah came out. In essence, we're going to welcome King David back. He's going to cross over the Jordan River. We'll celebrate that he's our king again. And so that's the picture that happens. And so as he is about ready to come back, there's some guests that are going to be there on the other side. Now, as we look at our second point tonight, let's look at, did I give you the third point? The reception, the request by David. Where are we at tonight? Yeah, you're on point there. The reception of the king. So let's look at the reception of the king. So David and his men traveled from Mahanaim, which was on the other side of Jordan, to the Jordan River. They're going to take an entourage. They're going to kind of take a ferry across the Jordan River, and they're going to be moving back towards Jerusalem where the palace was. So there's going to be three people that I want to look at tonight that met David on the other side of Jordan. And I want you to see some three different reactions David is going to have towards these people. Okay? So let's look at verse number 16. And Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite, which was of Bahurim, hasted and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And there was 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him, and they went over Jordan before the king. Now, let's talk about Shimei. John, did you cover Shimei? I think you skipped him. Yeah, because I never saw that part. Don't ever skip anything out of the Bible, John. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. It's all profitable. No, you had so much to cover. I know you can't tell every little story. But it was an interesting story. Shimei was a little rascal. How many have ever seen the Andy Griffith shows? Would you raise your hand? I love Andy Griffith. He's on at 8 o'clock and 8:30, and I watch 8 and 8:30, then I fall asleep usually. But anyhow, do you remember the little guy called Ernest T. Bass? You know what I'm talking about. Ernest T. He was a little squirrely guy, always throwing rocks through the windows. If you've never seen it, go Google it or YouTube it or something. And he was just a little crazy guy, a little hill guy from the country, the hills there, and was always, tormenting everybody. And this is what Shimei was. He was Ernest T. Bass, to put it in Andy Griffith terminology. I knew, Sarah, you'd appreciate this because we go trivia a little bit with that. So, when David was running away from Absalom, let's go back and tell you who Shimei is, and this is why I relate him to this character out of Andy Griffith. And when David was running from his son, his head is covered, he's barefooted, he's weeping, his household is with him. He's at one of the lowest points of his life. Shimei, the little rascal, is making fun of David the whole time, throwing rocks at him, laughing at him. God's curse you. Now, why was Shimei doing that? Because Shimei was a Benjamite. Well, who was from the tribe of Benjamin? Saul. You think there was a little rift there, like a Benjamite, this guy from Judah, he took over as king, and so he's throwing rocks at him, and he's cursing David. Now, one of David's men, Abishai, at that time, said, "Let me kill him, let me behead him." And to David's credit, David said, no, this might be part of God's judgment against me. Just leave him alone. So they showed mercy to Shimei. Well, now David wins the battle. He's coming back triumphantly, and guess who's there to meet him? Shimei. He's thinking, oh no, what an idiot I was. He's going to hunt me down. He's going to kill me. So he says, I better go meet him first and beg for forgiveness. And that's what Shimei does. So there's 1,000 Benjamites with him. Now, Benjamin and Judah are next to each other. They're part of the southern tribe of Israel, and the two most southern tribes of Israel. And now we see that Shimei with 1,000 of his other men are with him. And verse 18, and there went over a ferry boat to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was come over Jordan, and said unto the king, let not my lord impute iniquity unto me, neither do thou remember that which thy servant did perversely. The day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, and that the king should take it to his heart. He said, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. He's kind of like a kid that, he's only sorry when he gets caught. All of a sudden he's sorry now. Oh, David's going to kill me. And, in verse 20, he says, for thy servant doth now know that I've sinned. Therefore, behold, I'm come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down and meet my lord the king. He's going to beg for mercy and forgiveness. Well, you remember the guy that wanted to kill him the first time around? Well, he's there with David right then again, Abishai. And Abishai says, let me finish him off now. In verse 21, but Abishai, the son of Gera, answered and said, shall not Shimei be put to death for this? Because he cursed the Lord's anointed. So David had a decision to make. Should I seek revenge upon my enemy, or should I forgive? And you know what David chose? Forgiveness. I forgive you. David, despite all his faults, he was, in this particular case, he was a very forgiving man. I don't know that I would have done the same thing. Now realize and understand that for people to kill each other back in the Old Testament days, it was no big deal. Yeah, you kill people all the time. And, to execute that guy would have been perfectly fine. But David said, no, we're not going to do that. And he told Shimei in verse 23, thou shalt not die. And the king sware unto him. So the reception by Shimei, so he has mercy. Now, Shimei's story is going to come up again later on. And, after, when David, I don't want to get into it now too much, but when David was on his deathbed, he gave Solomon some instructions about Shimei. But anyhow, at that point, he said, I will not harm you. Second person he's going to now meet when he comes back to set up his kingdom is Mephibosheth. Do you remember who Mephibosheth was? Who was Mephibosheth? He was that crippled child. Well, he got crippled as a child. He was an adult. And he was related to King Saul. And do you remember the pact that David had with Jonathan Saul? He said, I will take care of your family members. I'm not going to kill your family members. So David, after Saul's death, David sent out notice, is there anybody in Saul's kingdom that I need to take care of? And they said, yes. Saul had a son. Saul had I think it was his grandson? His grandson, yeah. And he had been injured when he was 5 years old. And so he said, could you take care of Mephibosheth? He's lame. He's speaking of lame, okay. He's like the pastor. He can't walk too well. He couldn't walk at all. So now he brought Mephibosheth to his household. He ate at dinner with David all the time. He was his dinner guest. He was showing kindness to Jonathan and Saul by taking care of Mephibosheth. But you know what happened? When David left Jerusalem and David had to flee, what happened to Mephibosheth? Did he defect and join Absalom's group? Well, let's look at the story. Verse number 24. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, and that said son, but he was his grandson, came down to meet the king, and had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day that the king departed unto the day he came again in peace. He looked a mess. Hadn't bathed, hadn't shaved, hadn't changed his clothes. And verse 25, and it came to pass when he was come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said unto him, wherefore wentest not thou with me, Mephibosheth? Why did you come with me when I ran? Why did you stay? In essence, David wants to find, were you for me or against me? I took good care of you. Now, why would he think that Mephibosheth did not, had betrayed him and wanted to stay behind, in essence, to follow Absalom? And so there was a question. Now, there was a servant of Mephibosheth by the name of Ziba. Now, I don't think you covered this either, John. So I'm filling in for all of John's. What shall we call these? Skip overs? That's all right. He had too much to do. There's too much information there. Ziba, when David was running, came to David. And Ziba said, "Oh, I'm a servant of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth has stayed behind." What's he doing? He, in essence, is saying, "Oh, he's for Absalom." And what Ziba said is, "Since he betrayed you, could I have all his land?" And so David said, "Yeah, you could have his land." So Ziba had deceived David into believing that Mephibosheth had deserted him. And so now David wants to know, did you desert me? Ziba, I gave him your property, and what's up? What happened? So Mephibosheth gives his side of the story. You know, there's always two sides to every story, you know that? And, you know, sometimes we just listen to one side and we don't hear the other side. And anybody can twist a story to make it sound profitable for their agenda. And so Mephibosheth tells his story now. And this is what he said. He said, verse 26, "And he answered, My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For thy servant said, I will saddle me an ass, that I may ride thereon and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. And he hath slandered thy servant unto my lord the king. But the Lord, the king, is an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in thy sight." And that says, he took off on me, and I thought I wanted to leave. I wanted to go. I wanted him to prepare an animal for me to ride to David. I wanted to join you, but he never came back for me. He went and he lied about me, and he slandered me, and he said that, in essence, I was a traitor. So that's his side of the story. So now David has to make a decision. What am I going to do with Mephibosheth? Well, what did he do with Shimei? He forgave him. Now, Shimei was wrong. Mephibosheth now seemed like that was a valid story. I can't imagine Absalom wanting anything to do with Mephibosheth. So it doesn't even make sense that Mephibosheth would have converted his allegiance or his loyalty from David to Absalom. And so David then realizes that he had been deceived by Ziba, his servant. And so he wants to know, what do you want to do, David? He said, "Do whatever you think's best." Verse 28, he says, what right there have I to cry any more unto the king? He said, "I've told you my story, and David, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do, David." And verse 29, "And the king said unto him, Why speakest thou any more of thy matter? I've said, thou and Ziba divide the land." So David kind of makes a compromise. Remember, Mephibosheth had land given to him by David. When Ziba told him that Mephibosheth had betrayed him, the land was given to Ziba. So David says, just split the land. You have half, Ziba has half. Maybe David said, I don't know who to believe. So I'll just give you both half of the land, and I don't want to deal with this problem anymore. And so Mephibosheth, to his credit, in verse 30 says, "Yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king is come again in peace." He said, "I'm just glad you're back. And if you give away all my land, that's okay." So it kind of shows that Mephibosheth did have a good heart. I'm assuming that his story was the correct story. So we see person number 2 that meets David. Person number 3 that's going to meet David on his trip back to take over as king is an old man named Barzillai. Barzillai, the reception by Barzillai. Sounds like an Italian guy, doesn't it? Now, who is Barzillai? Well, let's look at verse number 31. Now, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, came down from Rogelim and went over Jordan with the king to conduct him over Jordan. So he actually traveled with David. He was on the other side of Jordan. And he travels with David now over the river Jordan to the land of Israel there. And notice it says here, now, verse 32, "Now Barzillai was a very aged man, even 80 years old. Well, how old is 4? We don't use scores anymore. A score is 20. 4 times 20 is 80. What was Lincoln's address? 4 score and how many? 7. 4 score and 7 years ago, our forefathers did something. Was that the Gettysburg Address? All right, good. Trying to remember my American history. As you can tell, I don't remember it that well. He's 80 years old. He's at the end of his life. He's an old man. And David says, Barzillai, you took good care of me when I was on the run. When other people would not take care of David, Barzillai did. And he says, he was 80 years old, and he had provided the king of sustenance while he lay at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. So he was a wealthy man, and when David was at his lowest point, running from his son, Barzillai took care of him. He fed him. He took care of his men. He used his great wealth to be a blessing. Loyalty. This story that we're seeing some people that were disloyal and some people that were loyal. Joab, though he was loyal to David, disobeyed David. Amasa, who was disloyal to David, is promoted. Shimei was disloyal. He's forgiven. Mephibosheth, it was said that he was disloyal, but he really wasn't. He now gets back at least a portion of his land. And now you have Barzillai, who was very loyal to King David. And David wants to repay Barzillai for his loyalty. In essence, what he does is he says, I want you to come and live with me, and I want you to live out the rest of your days in my household. In essence, come be part of my kingdom, be part of where he was going to live there in the palace. Now, Barzillai is an old man. And in verse 34, Barzillai said unto him, how long have I to live, that I should go up with the king unto Jerusalem? I'm this day 80 years old, and can I discern between good and evil? Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men and singing women? Therefore, should thy servant be yet a burden unto my Lord the king? He said, I'm an old man. I can't hear that well. I can't see that well. I can't enjoy it. I don't want to come and be a burden to you. He said, thank you for the offer, but I don't want to come and be a burden to you. But he says, in essence, though, but you know what? If you want to reward me, why don't you reward a servant of mine by the name of Chimham? Now, some people believe that Chimham may have been his son. It doesn't really identify who Chimham is. Look at verse 37. Let thy servant, I pray thee, turn back again, and I may die in my own city and be buried by the grave of my father. He says, I want to be buried where my parents were. I don't want to come to Jerusalem. And he says, but behold, thy servant Chimham, let him go over with my lord the king, and do all to him what shall seem good unto thee. And the king answered, Chimham shall go over with me then, and I will do to him which seem good unto thee, and whatsoever thou shalt require of him, that I do for him. So, in essence, he's going to show gratitude to Barzillai by taking care of Chimham. Once again, we don't know who Chimham is. May have been his son. And so Chimham joins the procession, and he goes back to Jerusalem. All right, let's see a third point of the story tonight. And let's look at the rivalry concerning the king. The rivalry concerning the king. Now, at this point, what group of people had accepted David as the king? Just Judah. Well, how many more tribes are there? Well, you got 11 other tribes. Now, Judah and Benjamin actually came together, because remember, there were 1,000 Benjamites that came. So you have Judah and Benjamin come together, but you have 10 other tribes that have not officially reinstated David as the king. So let's look first off in verse 41, the reasoning of the men of Israel. So verse 41, and behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said unto the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away, and have brought the king and his household and all David's men with him over Jordan? So they want to know, why why did Judah steal you? Now, did Judah steal him? No, he went to Judah, didn't he? And he said, would you receive me back? And what did Judah say? Yes. So they didn't have some clandestine plan to steal him back and put him in as their king, and but yet this is what the rest of Israel's thinking, like, Judah, what are you doing? You are now taking the king back. How about us? Who's going to be our king? So number 2 under this, the response of the men of Judah. And all the men of Judah answered the king of Israel, because the king is near to kin to us. He's from our tribe. Wherefore, when then you be angry for this matter? Have we eaten it at all the king's cost, or hath he given us a gift? He didn't come and give us gifts and pay us off. And what are you talking about? So Judah now is arguing with the other 10 tribes. So what do we have? We have a conflict again. That's all David's life was all about. Conflict. One conflict after the next. So the response of Judah. Now let's look at the rift between the tribes. Look at verse 43. The men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more right in David than ye. Why then did you despise us, that our advice should not be first, had it in bringing back our king? And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So they're arguing. And Israel says, look, we have 10 tribes, you have 2 tribes. Why didn't you come to us? Are we not one nation? Why didn't you get our approval likewise? And Judah's mad, and they're giving it right back even more. So what do we have? We have this rift between the tribes now over receiving David back as a king. So, once again, we see problems all the time, problems, right? Nothing ever goes easy for David. All right, let's look at the next point tonight. Let's look at the rebellion against the king. Now, David sometimes did not take care of situations the way he should have. Let's go back years ago when Amnon raped his sister, Tamar. David didn't do anything about it. When Absalom took it in his own hands to kill Amnon, David didn't do anything about it. David was very passive in his own family. He didn't take the lead. Though he was a great leader, for some reason, he didn't lead his family as strongly as he should have. And there were times which David kind of didn't take care of matters. And, sometimes as a leader, it's just easier to let things work out themselves and not interfere. But other times you have to step in. Now, this is a time which David should have stepped in. He should have went to all the tribes and said, okay, you guys decide now, do you want me to be king again? And if so, let's make it official, and everybody can agree together. But David does nothing. And this is going to cause more problems. Look at chapter number 20. Chapter number 20. And there happened to be there a man of Belial. Now, if you ever read a phrase, a man of Belial, that is a description meaning he's foolish, wicked, vile. He is reckless, lawless. And so there is a man by the name of Sheba. So here's our next guy we have to look at. Sheba, the son of Bishri, a Benjamite, and he blew a trumpet. Now, of course, he's from Benjamin, the tribe which Saul was from. And he said, we have no part in David, neither have we an inheritance of the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, so every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba, the son of Bishri. But the men of Judah clave unto their king from Jordan even to Jerusalem. So what happens? You have this Benjamite call out his tribe. We don't want to follow David. And follow me in essence. And so now you have another revolt, much like Absalom's revolt. So under this, first off, you have the people in revolt. So what's going to happen? They have to decide, do we follow David or do we follow Sheba? Now, had David already proven himself that no matter who comes against David, he always wins? Absalom beat him. He thought he could win. He defeated Absalom and his group. He defeated the Philistines. Don't mess with David. He was God's man. He was God's anointed. But yet these are proud, arrogant, power-hungry people that are rising, trying to lead a revolt in very tumultuous times. So look what happens. And so he gets a following of people. And the next thing is the pursuit of the rebels. Look at verses 4 through 15. Then said the king to Amasa. Now, who was Amasa? Remember we talked about him? Amasa was, who did he replace? Amasa replaced Joab. Amasa was the general under Absalom. Remember? Remember, he replaced Joab with Amasa. So now Amasa is given a job. Now Amasa was not a good leader. He failed in his revolt against David earlier. But now he says, Amasa, here's what I want you to do. Gather some troops together and we're going to go after Sheba. Come back in 3 days. Well, 3 days comes, 3 days go, and guess what? Where's Amasa? We don't know. He's not back yet. So what does David do? He gets Abishai. And this is in verse number 6. And David said to Abishai, now shall Sheba the son of Abishai do us more harm than did Absalom? Take thou thy Lord's servants and pursue after him, lest he get him fenced cities and escape us. So he said, in essence, I don't know what happened to Amasa. So Abishai, you go. And he's not going to use Joab. And so he sends now Abishai. Remember, Abishai was the guy who wanted to kill Shimei. I know all these names get confused after a while. So try to keep them all straight. So they start pursuing now. Well, as they're pursuing, guess who shows up? Amasa with his troops. Guess who else shows up? Joab. Now, Amasa had replaced Joab. How do you think that made Joab feel? Joab is a cutthroat guy. Joab is a guy you don't mess with. And so now they're all supposed to be chasing after Sheba, but old Joab has other ideas. And he calls Amasa. He goes, hey, come on over here. Let's talk about what's going on here. Amasa doesn't see the knife that's under his cloak. And while they're together, he takes the knife and plunges it under his fifth rib. That was always a place where people got killed, under the fifth rib. And so he kills Amasa. Why did he kill him? Because he took his job. Because he was jealous. I think Amasa said, this guy was a rebel. He deserves to die anyhow. David should have never appointed him. But what is Joab doing? He's taking matters in his own hands. He's killing people David never said to kill. By the way, this is going to come back to haunt Joab. So they take off and they pursue the enemy. Next point is the purge of the renegade. In verses 16 through 22, just kind of, we don't have time to read the whole story, so let me just kind of go over it with you. So now you have Joab joins Abishai, and they're chasing down Sheba. Now Sheba knows he's in trouble. I mean, he's got these fierce warriors after him. He's messed with David. So he runs to a town called Abel, about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. So now they're way up north. And he goes there and he hides out in this walled city, hoping to find refuge. Joab gets there to the walled city, and they're about ready to plunder this city. They're about ready to knock down the walls, go in there, kill everybody, and kill this man. But you know, in Deuteronomy, chapter number 20, Deuteronomy 20 said that whenever Israel was going to battle and they were going to besiege a city, that they should always try to negotiate first. What was God trying to do? Spare lives. So in essence, he was not following God's prescription. And he's ready to knock down the walls. And an elderly woman comes out and she says, can I talk to you, Joab? And he respects this woman and he listens to what she has to say. And he said, in essence, she said, are you going to destroy all our city just for one man? And she said, let us take care of this one man. And so Joab said, all right, you toss me his head and I won't come and plunder your city. So the woman went back in. She told everybody, hey, either this guy's going to kill all of us or we got to kill this guy. And so they cut off the head of Sheba. They tossed it over the wall. Once again, gruesome. Gruesome. Everything he did was gruesome. and tosses the head of Sheba over. Plop, plop, there it goes. And Joab is satisfied. The rebellion is over, and David now can become king over all of Israel. Let me give you the last point in closing, the restoration of the kingdom. Verse 23 through 26. So now David appoints officers. Well, Joab was put back as an officer again now. Joab, verse 23, now Joab was over all the host of Israel, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and so these were kind of like bodyguards. And Adoram was over the tribute, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. So what's happened? Sheva was a scribe, Zadok and Abiathar were the priests, and Ira was the chief ruler about David. So David now is reestablishing his kingdom, and he's putting all these people in order, and they're going to help him now to reestablish his kingdom. So that's our story tonight. It's kind of a crazy story, isn't it? David's life. And it just keeps getting better and better, and more gruesome and gruesome, more violent. Next week, we're going to see more violence. Spoiler alert, more people are going to get killed. So, the Old Testament was not for the faint of heart. Aren't you glad we live in New Testament days? All right. Well, we're going to say goodbye to people who are watching online. We hope you enjoyed the lesson tonight, and we're going to go to prayer with our folks here tonight.